All right, Hodag, can I get a mic check? Perfect. Don't move. Wait, have you seen Snipe? Whatever. This is Ester, recording outside of Muir Tower. Podcast trailer, take 9. The summer of 2020. I'm scrolling through the cryptid feeds when I see Metazoo, a brand new cryptid trading card game. The art is nostalgic, the game mechanics are bizarre, and something about seeing Hodag, the Fresno Nightcrawlers, and Mothman sucks me in. I order a bundle and go about my day. March 2022. I'm on the other side of the country, driving through torrential rains to compete in Metazoo's first tower. 160 players, 2 days, winner is crowned Tower Caster of the Water Aura type. How did I go from collecting an obscure indie card game to battling with some of the best players in the world? What sets the top casters apart from the rest of us? Join me as I cover the very first Metazoo Tower circuit. My name is Ester, and this is Towers, a Metazoo podcast. Wait, Hodak, you're still on mic. Oh, there you are. Hey, Snipe, don't bite that. Okay. I think we got it. Okay, so what is this podcast? As you have gathered, there is a trading card game called Metazoo. It features, at this point, a lot of American folklore, cryptids, aliens, you name it. I would argue this is a very good trading card game. Not only on collectability, but game mechanics, gameplay. The competitive scene has been one of the most interesting, puzzle boxes I've ever participated in. So Metazoo came out a few years ago. They've dabbled with doing tournaments at various collecticons, but this year, 2023, they're doing something that I think is really rad. They're doing what they call towers. One tournament a month. Each of those tournaments takes place in a spot that is significant to the aura type that it features. For example, the first tower, the water tower, took place near Loveland, near the Loveland Castle, where the Loveland Frogman was first discovered. So not only do you have these monthly tournaments where you get to go to places that are significant to that cryptid, experience local culture, and play high-level Metazoo, you're also competing to take on these roles, right? You're going to be either the forest headcaster, the water headcaster of that tower, which then plays into the tournament at the end of the year Caster Cup. In my early gaming life, I heard stories about Legend of the Five Rings, a trading card game that incorporated the player's experience into the story where tournaments would determine what happens next. People describe it as one of the best gaming experiences they've ever had, and I've always been chasing something like that. I think Metazoo's provided that. Each of these towers has not a unique rule set, but a unique bonus to various cards that completely changes up the game. If you play constructed Metazoo, you need to completely rethink everything you're doing going into a tower, which means every month, all of the casters who are going to participate have a whole new thing to contend with, a whole new deck to brew or decks to brew. It's really interesting. On top of that, they're doing a number of these things at cryptid conventions. So you get to take in the local lore that has inspired this game. You get to travel to pretty unique places, I would say, as far as card games go. And on top of that, they're doing things like galas. They're doing release events. I went to the first one. I'm hooked. Honestly, I want to go to all of them. I'm going to try. And I want to cover it with a podcast. I played trading card games when I was 9 and 10 years old. I actually lived near Loveland for 1 year when Pokemon came out. I played the Pokemon game there. I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area where they actually had Wizards of the Coast stores in the mall, and you could play in tournaments there, and I could collect gym badges, actual gym badges, and face gym leaders. It was very interesting to me. I had a good time, and then when I ran out of Pokemon players to play with, I picked up Magic for about a year before I was just too poor. I have not played a competitive trading card game since then. I've always had a knack and an interest in deck building. I love tactics. I love getting into the math and the noodly elements of it, and I love the creativity that goes into it. But I am an intermediate player, right? I am not one of these top players, but I want to get there. I want to become the best player I can possibly become. And I think that's true of a lot of you too. So this podcast is for you and me. It's for new people who want to get into this game and who want a kind of one-stop shop on understanding, like, what is this circuit? What does it take to get involved? What do you do once you are involved? And then ideally for high-level players, I think you'll enjoy watching this journey as well. I think a lot of you will relate to this, having come from similar experiences, and I'd also just love to hear your input. Now, I am going to assume that you have, at least for this first season of episodes, a medium understanding of the game. And particularly going into these towers, I will do light breakdowns of cards, but I know that most of the initial audience for this are going to be people who are actively looking to participate in towers. They're going to know these cards, and so I don't want to bog it down and create a bad listening experience for them. Later on, because right now we have some catching up to do. The water tower has just happened. The earth tower has been announced. Once we get past the earth tower, I can start getting into episodes and probably even a season that really breaks down this game. And as you've noticed by now, this is an audio podcast. This is not a YouTube podcast. So this is something you can listen to in the car. I'd like to create episodes so that while you're driving to work or the next tower even, you can kind of pick up this game. But for now, we gotta go, right? We gotta move. Water has happened. Earth is coming. I want to help you both understand and prepare. And I also want to bring some of this experience to the people who can't participate in these things or won't be able to for a while. These are happening all over the country. And for a lot of people, paid time off, travel, these things can be prohibitive. And you might only be able to go to 1 or 2 towers. And so hopefully this helps you get that experience so that you can prepare for the tower that is closest to you. Now, I know I said I was going to assume you had a medium knowledge of this game, but because this is the first episode, I do want to break this down. So as mentioned before, Metazoo is a trading card game. Things that make this game unique. There are a few things. Let's talk about a deck, or the terminology we're going to use in this, a spell book. There's a really easy way to understand and a reason for this terminology. It's not just flavor. What is a book? It is a stack of pages that are bound together. Each page has significant information on it. What is a deck of cards? It is a stack of cardboard, not bound together necessarily. Each card has unique information on it. So in Metazoo, being a magical themed game, your deck is your spell book. Each card is a page. And when you pull a card, what do you do when you want to go to a specific page in your book? You bookmark, you go to your bookmark. When you pull a card in Metazoo, it's not called drawing, it's called bookmarking. I'm going to use this language going forward just to get you used to it, because that's one of the first things I learned about going from an intermediate to a top level player is embrace the language. There is a reason for it. It does help you understand both the rules and the flow of the game. One of the main things Metazoo markets itself in being unique are fourth walls. I think I would call these like places of power and spell components, but I know, the country has a lot of various views on things like magic, so you probably want to bury that lead a little bit. But fourth walls involve items or places that activate different rules on your cards or pages. As an example, the Loveland Frogman has one of the best abilities, one of the best powers in the game, called Charmed. But in order to activate Charmed, you need to have liquid water present in the arena. In a normal casual or constructed tournament, they usually let you write these items down, but in an official Metazoo tournament, you need to bring these items with you. So you would need to bring water in order to activate that ability for Loveland, right? And this might sound a bit strange at first, but then when you go to these tournaments, seeing the other objects that people bring, I like to call them spell components. Seeing the spell components they bring will tell you a lot about their spell book and what their gameplay style is going to be. You can only bring 4 of these items. And so if you think, for example, liquid water is going to be very common and you have a 5th item you want to bring, you might opt not to bring liquid water. You might hope to piggyback off of your opponent's spell components. Like many things with Metazoo, as I said, this might sound strange at first, but once you get into it, it does create a very interesting experience, especially when you're sitting across someone else who has scuba goggles on and a box of rice-a-roni and has bandages wrapped around their head. Now, the next element of Fourth Wall, I could call them places of power, Terra in the game. The idea, like the Bigfoot card, gaining invisibility if you were in or within 5 miles of a forest. In a competitive event, like if you're playing in a forest, that's not actually going to count. You need to play a card, a Terra card that has a forest on it. But for towers, the whole conceit of towers is we are, as players, aka casters, going to these towers, which are in locations that are relevant to its aura type in the real world. The storyline of Metazoo is relevant to this whole tower system. Metazoo does not take place in an alternate world, it takes place in our world. It takes place a bit in the future after the veil is shattered and things like cryptids and magic become both visible and available to the common people. There are like grave consequences for that. We'll talk about that a little bit on this podcast when it's relevant to the tower. But for the tower, because these are taking place in locations that are both significant to that cryptid in our world and significant to the story within the Metazoo world, they have active locations, active places of power, aka Terra, when you participate in this tower, and this completely changes things. For example, water, the water aura, the first tower that we just had. One of the most common decks you'll see is the Loveland Lockdown, which uses the Loveland Frogman's power Charmed, which when fatigued, aka turned sideways, allows you to point at another creature card, aka a beastie, and inflict every status effect in the game on it, effectively removing them from the game, though there are ways that you can break out of it. This deck is normally very defensive. It relies on potions to protect your Frogman, and it comes in with a late game push in order to wear out your opponent and then knock them out when the time is opportune for you. In a tower, you not only automatically have specific Terra effects active, such as river or ocean or lake. All of those bonuses become ×3. This is what completely changes the nature of the format. Let me go to a 1-cost cryptid or beastie, the Water Baby of Massacre Rock. Water Baby has 10 LP, which is very easy, just about anything will knock it out in this game. And normally it does 30 damage on its attack, which is quite respectable, and it has Paralyze on its attack, which is really good. Paralyze will blank the opponent's page, preventing them from hitting back, which means your Water Baby is going to survive. Water Baby gets +10 from 2 different Terra effects, which means that if in your constructed spellbook you dedicated 2 precious slots to these Terra pages, you would be dealing 50 damage instead of 30 damage, which is now very good. In the tower format, these are places of power within this storyline. These are ×3 bonuses, which means Water Baby, which costs 1, you can play it on your first turn, is now swinging for 90 damage. Casters have 1,000 life points. You win the game by reducing those life points down to 0. Water Babies swinging over a few turns, the game is over if they face no resistance. In other words, you're taking pages that were good and making them great, and then you're taking pages that were unplayable and making them incredible. Water has one big heavy hitter named Chessie. Most water decks are going to play Chessie. Chessie, it's like an American Loch Ness monster, big ol' water dinosaur. Normally, Chessie gets +10 damage for every water page in the arena, which means if you bring it in late when you've played a lot of water pages, Chessie's going to be swinging for some of the highest damage in the game. Well, Chessie gets a 50 damage bonus from Lake normally. So if you have a Lake, it's swinging for 60 damage +10 for every other water page. In a tower, that Lake bonus is tripled. So now Chessie is swinging for 160 damage for every water page. On top of that, you are guaranteed to be playing mirror matches against other decks that are the same aura type as yours, which means Chessie minimum is going to be swinging for usually 300 damage, if not more. But one of my favorite beasties Altamahaha, another water dinosaur, in the normal constructed game is not terribly relevant. It does 20 damage. If you can get the river out, it does more, and it gains invisibility. And that's an if, because your slots in your spellbook are precious. Do you really want to use them on a Terra page to give some of your cards a bonus? The answer is sometimes. But in a tower, you don't need to do that. Altamahaha is now coming out invisible, guaranteed, and also gets a 50 damage bonus, which means Altamahaha is swinging for 170, 190 if you're bringing its spell component, which is Rice. All of these components are relevant to the lore of the actual cryptid and will often encourage you to go do some homework on them. That's great, and that was a lot of my strategy. An unplayable page becomes playable. A playable page becomes great. The third element of towers, and this is the other thing that really changes anything you might have known about the game before, is the restriction. When we are going to these towers, we are competing to see who the best caster in that aura type is. Who's going to be the tower caster? Which means whatever tower that is, earth, dark, spirit, you name it, we need to show up with spellbooks themed around that. And that's where the restriction comes into play. 60% of your pages, not including aura, need to be the aura type of that tower. We'll do a whole episode on this later, but in a nutshell, if I'm playing a 40-page spellbook at the water tower, which I did, that means I have 16 slots that don't need to be water. And I need aura. Aura is the currency of the game. It's how you pay for cards. I played 10 because I like consistency, which means I only have 6 slots in which to play non-water pages. And if you look at any spellbook that has won a competition in the last year, go to the Caster Society website, they log a lot of those, and it's just a great resource. You will see that just about every deck runs way more than 6 alternative aura-type pages in their spellbook. Water does especially. Water will often run more potions than that. And so now we have some really interesting restrictions. You have certain staple cards that you would normally play in any spellbook that you might not want to play anymore, partly because you don't have room for it, but also because your opponent doesn't have room for it. And you need to not only think about your style, but your opponent's style and your resources and your opponent's resources. In that way, we have just a very unique format here that I think you should give a shot. I think you should participate in. For those of you who like to collect and sell, I think this podcast will also be a good resource for you, because cards that were not necessarily relevant or attracting a high value before, whether that be trading or if you're trying to get currency for your pages, now will have great relevance. And the people who are in the know, the people who know what pages will be good in the next tower or have a good idea, are going to go and buy these pages out. And you might have some of these in your collection, and it might be worth trading for that card that you've been coveting. So now you know what Metazoo is. You know what towers are. Why am I doing this show? Well, I'm a podcaster and I'm a sound designer. And man, I needed a hobby that was not doing those things professionally. And I have talked to a number of casters over the last, 6 months of playing about things that they would like to see. And a lot of them wanted more quality content that would help them stay engaged and become informed and participate in this game. I went to the water tower with my mics, recorded some materials, and I had such a great time that I was like, you know what, I'm committing to this. I'm not only going to go to 3 towers, which was my original plan. I'm going to go to as many as they'll let me in, and I'm going to cover them. No matter where Metazoo goes, no matter what happens in the future, this year is going to be one of the most unique game experiences I think someone who enjoys games can participate in. And for once in my life, I'm in a position where I can just up and go. I can work anywhere. I have all of the equipment. And so I wanted to bring this show to you. Stay tuned for future episodes. If you're listening to this on YouTube, hi, welcome, comment, do all of those things. But I really intended this show to be listened to on your walks or on drives or during travels to the towers. We have so many good YouTube channels out there, but I have not seen a lot of great competitive resources for people when they're on their day-to-day move. And that's what I wanted to provide here. So this was episode 1. Stay tuned for episode 2, in which I'm going to cover what it takes to become a tower caster, what separates top casters from the rest of us. I interviewed a bunch of casters, a bunch of people you might recognize at the water tower, and I'm going to play their clips and we're going to talk about them. I hope you tune in. I hope you share this around, and I hope you enjoyed it. It's going to be a pretty wild year, and I'm very excited to see where this podcast takes us. Towers, a Metazoo podcast, was created by me, Ester Ellis. The cover art was made by Chandler Candela. Music by the Heatley Bros. More details in the description. Want to say hello? Follow the show on Instagram at Towers Podcast. Send me an email at towersgamepodcast@gmail.com and say hi in Metazoo's Discord servers. Many of the figures in Metazoo originate in indigenous lore, and I think it's important for me to acknowledge that I make this podcast on the traditional lands and home of the Tongva Nation. This game presents us with a rich opportunity to get in touch with the living cultures that surround us, and I hope you can take a moment to reflect on the history of the land you stand on and the figures and the cards you play.